here.
Clean the house.
Please sit down, Dean. Sorry.
Wow, I'm impressed.
Be my guest. I'm falling apart here. Okay. Well, it's the end of the day. This is the fourth session in a row I moderated, so if I drop something, give me a break.
He does everything.
So this is really great to have you at the end of the day, Dean. And I think there were a number of elements in the preceding session that are pertinent.
Or impertinent.
Impertinent, but pertinent to what you have to say, because you're thinking so interestingly about
Thank you.
health. You know what you do. You run the Preventive Medicine Research Institute at UCSF. You're a professor of medicine there, but you've been researching for many years about how lifestyle changes can really affect a wide range of health outcomes. And you've written all these books, which I'll just name a few of. The most recent one, The Spectrum, Love and Survival, Eat More, Weigh Less, Dr. Dean Ornish's program for reversing heart disease. Number of all those bestsellers. You were on various White House commissions for various presidents. You turned Steve Jobs into a vegan. I mean, you've done a lot of amazing things.
But I did not kill Steve Jobs. That's another story.
No, that's not. You're not being blamed for that. But so.
Some people do.
Anyway, so I'm very eager to hear your thoughts about this whole question of how do we make people healthier. And I know you've been giving a lot of thought even in some new ways that have to do with the media environment we're in. So I don't know, if I started out by saying enough to give you a chance to start talking?
Sure. First, thanks for including me today. It's a great conference. I've been doing this work for 40 years. It's my passion. We helped create a new field called lifestyle medicine, which is using lifestyle changes not only to prevent disease, but actually to treat and even reverse it. And so over in a series of randomized trials and demonstration projects, we're able to show for the first time that simple lifestyle changes, eat well, a whole foods plant-based diet, various exercise, including walking, stress management techniques, including yoga and meditation, and maybe most important, we'll talk more about this, love and support, or eat well, move more, stress less, love more, can actually reverse the progression of the more diseases we look at and the more underlying biological mechanisms we study, the more reasons we have to show why these simple changes are so powerful and how quickly people can get better. So we began with heart disease. We showed that that could be reversed, even severe heart disease, diabetes, early stage prostate cancer, by extension breast cancer, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, obesity. When you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes, turns on the good genes, turns off the bad genes, particularly down-regulating what I call the oncogenes that promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer. It's just amazing how quickly that you can show improvement. We did a study with, and we published that with Craig Venter in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. We did a study with Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize for discovering telomerase and the role of telomeres, ends of our chromosomes that regulate how long we live. She found that as you get older, your telomeres get shorter. As your telomeres get shorter, your life gets shorter, and the risk of premature death from pretty much everything goes up proportionate to that. We still have the only controlled study showing that any intervention, in this case, these same lifestyle changes, can actually lengthen telomeres. And with all this talk about personalized diets and personalized lifestyle interventions and precision medicine, I think that's great if you're talking about targeting a special new immunotherapy for pancreatic cancer type cell type. But for most of these chronic diseases, it wasn't like there was one set of diet and lifestyle recommendations for reversing heart disease, a different one for diabetes or prostate or whatever. It was the same for all of them. And the more you change, the more you improve at any age. So it's a very, and I think in part because a lot of these chronic conditions share underlying disease pathways like chronic inflammation and oxidative stress and so on. And they manifest in different ways. So it's really, the longer I do this work, the simpler it becomes.
Well, that's a great thing in some ways. It makes things simple.
Well, Steve Jobs used to always say he was more proud of what he left out of the iPhone than what he put into it. Like when you really understand something, when you make it your life, you can really, people who don't know anything about it can make it simple, and people who spend their whole lives doing it can make it simple.
Well, so the good thing is we kind of know what we should do. Mm-hmm. Right.
And there is a real convergence of agreement about that.
But the weird thing is we don't do what we should do.
Not always.
The majority of us, 75% of Americans are obese or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to name one statistic. And I know one of the reasons you wanted to speak at this conference was because you've been giving a lot of thought to the media environment and the kind of digitized landscape in which we live, and the phone addiction that we are all prey to, almost literally everyone, and how it dovetails with what you've learned. So talk a little bit about how you're thinking about that.
Well, if information were enough for people to change, nobody would smoke. It's not like I'd say, hey, David, smoking's bad for you. Go, oh, I didn't know that. I'll quit today. You know, it's everybody knows that. It's on every package of cigarettes. So it's not enough to give people information. It's not enough just to focus on their behavior. We have to work at a deeper level. We have to say, why do people smoke? I mean, really the essence of all of my work in a sentence is to treat the cause. And if you say, why do people smoke, or for that matter, overeat, as you indicated, or drink too much, or take opioids, or work too hard, or spend too much time playing video games, or whatever it happens to be. And I'd ask the people in our studies, you know, teach me something. Why do you do these things? They seem so maladaptive to me. And they'd kind of say, you don't get it. You don't have a clue, they'd say. These are very adaptive. They help us deal with our pain, our loneliness, our depression. There's been a radical shift in our culture in the last 50 years with the breakdown of the social networks that used to give people a sense of connection and community. What I'm learning is that anything that brings us together is healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole. You know, yoga from the Sanskrit, to yoke, to unite, to bring together. These are really old ideas that we're rediscovering. And in the last 50 years, 50 years ago, people had an extended family they saw regularly, and for the most part. They had a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people that grew up together. They had a church or synagogue they went to regularly. They had a job that felt secure that they'd been at for 10 years or more. And many people today don't have any of those things. And we pay a price for that. And I wrote a book about this in 1998 called Love and Survival that reviewed what were then hundreds and now literally thousands of studies that showing that people who are lonely and depressed are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely than those who have a sense of love and connection and community. And I don't know anything in medicine that has that powerful an impact. They say things like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes, and they're always there for me. You're going to take away my 20 friends? What are you going to give me? Or they say food fills that void. Or a well-known food writer said, you know, fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain. Or alcohol or opioids numb the pain. Or other drugs numb the pain. Or video games numb the pain. Or as many of us have found, working all the time numbs the pain. You know, we have lots of ways of dealing with our pain. But if you just try to numb or bypass literally or figuratively the pain, you're just killing the messenger. You know, it's like clipping the wires to a fire alarm and going back to sleep while your house burns. You know, you've just killed the messenger. So our approach is to help people use the experience of their suffering as a doorway for transforming their lives in ways that go beyond just, risk factor reduction. Fear is not a good motivator. In the short run, fear is a great motivator. People do anything for a month or so after they've had a heart attack. But in politics, as we're finding now, or in health, it's not sustainable. Fear is not a sustainable motivator. But joy and pleasure are. And because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, when you make big enough changes in diet and lifestyle, most people feel so much better so quickly, and the love and support that they get is so important that it reframes the reason for making these changes from fear of dying, which is not sustainable, to joy and pleasure and freedom and feeling good, which are.
Okay, so, I mean, let me just immediately mention the word Facebook, because this is the connective tissue of the planet, more or less now. This one company's business product.
Right.
It was invented specifically to connect you to the people you already know in the real world. That was the design feature at its core from the beginning, around which it still more or less rotates, even though most people don't really use it the way it was designed to be used, and they collect friends or whatever, and it's becoming a media platform. But it is a deliberate connective tissue that emerged from the technology sector. So that's got to be intrinsically a positive, given the landscape you're describing, is it not?
Well, it can be, not necessarily though. And I have great admiration and respect for Mark Zuckerberg, and what he's accomplished is phenomenal. And I especially like his recent 6,000-word manifesto that he talks about these different aspects.
Of community,
Of community,
your work,
right.
yeah.
But, Facebook can also be a way of making people really depressed, because most people don't put on their Facebook profile that they have a kid on heroin, or they failed at this or did that, or they wake up in the middle of the night with terror, or they don't know, who to ask for help.
I don't know why. Why don't they?
People put, it's like your bio sketch. When you introduce me, you don't talk about all
know.
the time I wanted to kill myself when I was in college or whatever. Because we want to say, we want this image of who we are that we think is going to be a little more lovable, because people do feel lonely and they want to feel connected. It's like, oh, I got to really, look like I got it all together so that people will love and respect me. But the problem is when you do that, however it turns out, you lose. If you don't get the love and respect, you lose. And even if you do, it's not really something you can enjoy, because it's like, well, if they really knew this other part of me, maybe they wouldn't be there. And when you grow up in a family 50 years ago, or a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people, they really know you. They don't just know your Facebook profile or your bio sketch. They know where you messed up. They know your dark side. And you know that they know, because you grew up together, and they know that you know that they know. And there's just something profoundly primal and healing about being seen in that way. Like in Avatar, I see you, But that's actually from an African proverb, just to be seen. And in our support groups, in our work, Medicare is now covering our program. We are creating a new paradigm of healthcare instead of sick care around the country. We're training hospitals and clinics and physician groups. We're working with a company called ShareCare, and we're really trying to create this new paradigm of lifestyle medicine. And as part of doing that, it's not just the diet. Medicare will pay for 72 hours, and most insurance companies will now too, of training. So we divide that into 18 4-hour sessions. So people come for 4 hours at a time, which is a lot. An hour of exercise, an hour of yoga and meditation. Who would have thought Medicare would be paying for meditation and yoga? An hour of a group meal with a lecture. But to me, the most important part is what we call the support group. But it's not really a support group, it's an intentional community. And the rule of it is what goes in the group stays in the group. So you can be open and authentic, which is what people really crave. The real epidemic, again, is depression and loneliness. And if you have nowhere that feels safe enough to let down your emotional defenses, those same walls that protect you also isolate you, because they're always up. It's not like you shouldn't have defenses, but if you have nowhere you can let them down, then you start to feel really isolated. And the paradox is the very thing that we think we're doing to protect us is the very thing that's threatening our survival, because it's creating this sense of loneliness. And so in the groups, somebody might say, oh, I may look like the perfect dad, but again, my kid's on heroin. And instead of someone else going, oh, well, why don't you send him to a drug rehab program, like they hadn't thought of that, or give them glib advice, to say, what am I feeling? And let me express that to you as a feeling. Now, it's so easy to make fun of that, especially here in New York, about, oh, it sounds so California and touchy-feely. And I used to get defensive. And then I thought one day, it is touchy-feely. That's what makes it work so well. We are touchy-feely creatures. We're creatures of community. And so someone else might say, oh, what am I feeling? That feels really bad. I'm so sorry to hear that, Or, gosh, my kid has a different problem. Or, gosh, I used to have a drug problem. Or whatever it is. But suddenly, you're connected in a way. It doesn't change the fact that the kid's still on heroin, but it changes everything about how you react to that and how you relate to that. And those support groups are so meaningful that literally decades later, after our program ends, people are still meeting together, even if they didn't even like each other that much when they first started, just because that need for connection is so primal. It's as powerful as the need for, air and water and food, and in some ways even more so.
So the kind of uber question of the day has been, can tech play a role in taking us to a better place with health? So given that clearly it's contributed to some of the negatives you described, what's your feeling about whether tech and network communication can help scale this extremely labor-intensive kind of thing you're describing?
I don't know if this is the Uber or the Lyft question of the day, but...
Okay, Lyft. I'd rather say Lyft at the moment. We all would prefer Lyft at the moment anyway.
Well, technology, as you know, is just a form of power. I studied for decades with this ecumenical teacher named Swami Satchidananda. He said, it's like electricity. Plug in your fingers, it's bad. Plug in a lamp, it's good. It's how you use it. And I think, like in our program, after they finish their 72 hours, they continue to meet virtually using Zoom as a way of connecting with each other. They've already bonded in person. And sometimes it's actually easier because they can just go every Thursday at 5 o'clock from their living room. They just dial in and they can be with all these people.
Zoom is a video.
It's a video conferencing technology. But there are lots of them out there. You could use FaceTime. You could use Skype or whatever. So I think technologies, to me, and Facebook, what I would love Facebook to do, and it was missing in Mark Zuckerberg's manifesto, as brilliant as it was, is to say, how can we create authentic, safe groups where people can really get beyond their Facebook profile, can really say, this is who I am. I mean, Jamie Haywood, with Patients Like Me, has done this to some extent, bringing people together around a common chronic disease, and at least they can compare notes around different kinds of therapies and so on. But this goes a step beyond that, to just, how can we create communities on Facebook or anywhere that use that same model of maybe they're private communities within Facebook where people are committed to that process of just being open and authentic with each other in a non-judgmental way. And it's so powerful, it's so simple, and yet that's where the technology, I think, can be the most healing.
Well, it's intriguing that you say that, and it was really somewhat coincidental we had you and Ariana on the same program here, but it is quite parallel to what she was describing with Kristen Lemko from J.P. Morgan Chase that, in this big faceless, macho corporation, they're trying to build some of similar vulnerable. It's not quite as far as you're talking about, but the idea that love and connection is critical to our
survival and function,
right? And they're acknowledging that at inside this 240,000 person corporation. So maybe there's some signs there's an open-mindedness to this. And Ariana specifically said she thinks we're kind of at a tipping point in society on this, and it would be nice to think. But I just want to and obviously the Facebook part is of great interest to me. But, there was a wonderful essay about Zuckerberg's letter written by Yoav Harari, who wrote Sapiens and Homo Deus, which he said that this was in the Financial Times about a month and a half, 2 months ago. He said that he agreed with everything in Zuckerberg's letter, but the problem was that everything Facebook does is virtual, and to genuinely create community for people like us who are flesh and blood animals that really do respond to one another in the physical world, Facebook would somehow have to be getting people off the virtual into the physical as part of its product.
Well,
is that connected to what you think?
I don't really agree with that. I think physical is best, obviously, and especially if people have bonded physically in person, it's easier to do it with technology after that. But, studies have shown that just having people who have, like they did one study with Sheldon Cohen, I don't know how he got people to volunteer for this, where they dripped cold virus, rhinovirus, into people's noses. And everybody got infected with cold virus, but not everybody got sick. And those that had 4 or more phone calls a day from a loved one had 4 times fewer developing signs and symptoms of a cold. Even though 100% were infected, not everybody got sick. So it doesn't take a lot. A phone call. What's key is not the means of how it's done, but what's behind it. The real epidemic is not only loneliness and depression, which are the most toxic emotions, and chronic anger, which is the other toxic emotion, but the dearth of meaning and purpose. This goes all the way back to Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book, or Rachel Remen's beautiful book, Kitchen Table Wisdom, where people who have a sense of meaning, like in Nazi Germany, in the most dire of circumstances, in concentration camps, you could have 2 people in the same bunker, one survived and one didn't. And it wasn't necessarily the one that was the physically healthiest that did. It was the one that had this greatest sense, I've got to survive, the sense of meaning, so that I can, bear witness, be reunited with my loved ones. And so anything that can help people, so like I always ask people, who come to see me, why do you want to live longer? Now, people aren't used to being asked that. There's a kind of an assumption, particularly in Silicon Valley, that people want to live forever. But I can tell you, having been, been suicidally depressed in college and come that close to actually doing myself in, which was my doorway into this whole area of my life, telling somebody who's lonely and depressed that they're going to live longer is not that motivating, because they're just trying to get through the day. I mean, seriously, they're just saying, hey, I don't know if I want to live longer. Telling somebody they're going to live to be 86 instead of 85 isn't that motivating, even when they're 85, because we have to come back to, why do I want to live longer? And people often say things like, I want to watch my kids grow up, or dance at their wedding, or write a book, or whatever it happens to be. But if you can get them in touch with what brings a sense of meaning and purpose, which is increasingly hard to do in a large corporation like you're talking about with Ariana, just the fact that an employer cares enough about you to give you those kinds of tools can create a sense of meaning. And all the studies show that absenteeism and presenteeism and healthcare costs and all those improve when something as simple as just paying attention to someone and saying, tell me, what matters to you and what's important in your life.
My watch keeps ringing. But so tell me, though, what specifically you'd like to see Zuckerberg do with Facebook to bring about some of this. I think these are telemarketers.
We have 7 minutes.
I had to get telemarketing on your watch.
Take a deep breath.
Yeah, really. The world we live in, we need something different happening. So what does Zuckerberg do? And then we can hear from audience people, too.
Well, I would first of all, I appreciate the question. It's our feelings that connect us, as I mentioned before, and it's easy to make fun of. I mean, let me give you an example. Can I just do a quick exercise? It takes 30 seconds.
Please.
So if you feel comfortable, close your eyes for a moment and tell me how you feel when I say the following. I think you're a jerk and I think you're wrong. Now open your eyes. Feel good?
Yeah, thanks.
Did I want to make you get to know me better? Probably not, right? Now, generally, most people would, and this is just an exercise, I'm getting there. But normally when I say something like that, people generally they feel attacked. When you feel attacked, you want to either attack back, no, I'm not a jerk, you're a jerk, or you want to withdraw. Either you stop listening or you leave the room. But if intimacy is healing, it takes us in the opposite direction. Now close your eyes again and tell me how this feels. I feel angry and I feel upset. Open your eyes. Same or different? It's different, right? Most people say, gosh, it brings me in. I want to know why you feel that way. Now, it's not about making nice. It's not about the power of positive thinking. It's about, this is a negative emotion, quote unquote. I'm angry, I'm upset. And yet it brings you closer to me. And therefore, it's healing. The difference is one's a thought and one's a feeling. And it's our feelings that connect us. So what I'd like Mark Zuckerberg to do is to give people skills and create Facebook, virtual communities and perhaps real ones where people can meet online. And we find about 15 people is an ideal number. It's enough that's diverse, but it's not too much where people get time to talk. And just give them some basic skills on how to create a group that's healing, a healing group. And it's real simple. Focus on your feelings, express them as a feeling, and learn to listen empathically.
Now, that could happen bottom up by the users themselves.
Could.
As a movement, right?
But
with Facebook as the platform.
But if Mark were to do that, then the kind of whatever criticism he's getting could be mitigated tremendously, because helping people guide them into doing this, it could be done at the bottom up, but these are skills we don't really learn much about in our culture.
Yeah.
And to the degree that he can provide them, people become your most loyal customers, your most loyal users when they feel like this unmet need. I mean, business is all about meeting unmet needs. And when the unmet need is so primal and you can help somebody meet that need, they become your most loyal customers, they become your most loyal users.
And it isn't, I mean, the reason Facebook is of interest to you in part is because just of its sheer scale. There's no other way to, in your view, attack this problem at scale?
Well, that and the fact that it was, as you say, it was set up for that purpose. And to some degree, it has succeeded. In other ways, it's actually made people feel more lonely because they feel like they're never going to measure up to this person's perfect vacation or perfect family. But it's an incredible power that has never been used in the most healing way, and it would be so simple to do, and I'd love to see that.
Okay, who has a comment or a question?
Wouldn't you say that Meetup, it serves this purpose, both on the technology side, but also with the in-person meeting and the sense of community?
Meetup, yeah, that's interesting.
That's actually what the whole organization and company was derived for.
Well, let me put it this way. This need is so primal that even if you just meet it a little bit, you can create a certain amount of community. But it's usually when people have meetup groups, they're usually around some topic. They're not around this. The intention is not to create intimacy and love in that way. And I do think that if you come to that with that intention, it's amazing. We have people on their very first, when they have these when they have these support groups, they're the part that people have the most apprehension about, and yet it's the most meaningful. And within the first group, and certainly in the first two groups, they're often sharing things with each other that even their own spouses may not know. There's such a need for that we just need to provide that in a much more overt and targeted way, not just kind of as a side benefit of whatever they're meeting up about.
Okay, first Lynn, then Esther, then
I was just going to mention an initiative that we're
Who's got the mic?
still looking for funding.
back there.
Okay.
Linda.
That's going to be kind of a combination of the JED Foundation and potentially doing it on Facebook. But if we're going to use Watson to identify words that kids use that are angry words and that are more bullying, and then feed that back to them kind of on their own Facebook page to model better behavior. So I think some of these things can be done. It's still in the experimental idea phase, and we're looking for an additional funder to do it. But I think that is the kind of thing that we want to do as JED Foundation to really kind of open the kids' eyes to the words they're using that do exactly what you're saying.
I love that. There was a study done of millions of Twitter feeds, and they found that when you use the words that evoke anger and chronic hostility, that was what was most strongly linked with a whole variety of health conditions. So to the extent awareness is always the first step in healing, and to the degree you can help raise that awareness, that itself is healing.
Yeah, just really briefly, if I invited a meetup, gee, come hang out with some other lonely people, you're not likely to come. So that
not lonely people, but if the intention is to create a sense of intimacy, or greater intimacy, it doesn't mean that you're lonely or you're stigmatized in that way. And also, frankly, if I went to Medicare and I said, we want to teach people how to love better and let down their emotional defenses so they can, and quiet down their mind and body to experience inner peace and joy, they'd say, you're out of here. You know, it took 16 years. We finally got it because we had all the PET scans and angiograms and radionuclide ventriculograms and all this stuff. Even then it took 16 years with the support of Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. But ultimately, it's a conspiracy of love. It's a Trojan horse because, you know, people come in because they want to unclog their arteries or, you know, lower their blood pressure, get off their meds or whatever it happens to be. But in the process, what they rediscover is that they say things like, you know, I'm not as concerned if my arteries are more open because I'm more open. You know, it really becomes the catalyst for transforming their lives. Whereas a regular trained doctor, I'm really trained to just kill or numb or bypass that pain as opposed to helping them use that as a doorway for transforming their lives.
All I'm saying is the best way to get people to come to meetup is not, it is a little bit of a Trojan horse or a bait and switch. Say, you know, come to play chess.
Meetup, yeah, I agree with that. And the work.
Well, I'm sure in
You get
meetup
the
groups
intimacy.
today that are designed to play chess, there's a lot of this going on because
Sure.
people become friends.
Yeah,
I mean,
of course.
that's what happens, right?
I agree. And the work you're doing is great in the communities too. I'm sure you're seeing the same thing.
Wait,
but
let's quickly just...
But I do think that there's a place for overtly stating this is what we're doing here. And that's what Facebook could be doing.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, please.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Sure.
On the topic of nutrition, in my opinion, that is sometimes a luxury of the upper economic class. For example, processed food is a lot more affordable and more filling in a lot of cases than fresh produce or organic. And also, in some ways, access to fitness, there's a cost there, right? So what are your thoughts on reducing that barrier? And is there a way that technology can help to do that?
Well, there's some truth to that, but it's not really true. Because, I mean, overall, it's not true. Here's the thing. We trained the St. Vincent de Paul homeless shelter in San Francisco. Over 30,000 homeless people have been through our program. It's not just for affluent, educated people. Second, this is really a third world diet. You know, I worked with McDonald's back in 1999, people thought I'd gone into the heart of darkness, to put salads on the menu there, and they were great. But because of the perverse subsidies, it's an iatrogenic issue. Because of the perverse subsidies in the Farm Bill, the burger is 99 cents, the salad was $5.95. So if you're on a fixed income, as you say, you get more calories for your dollar by eating junk food. But this is, you know, globally, this is how, you know, I came up with this term, globalization of chronic disease. Other countries are starting to eat like us and live like us and die like us. And the irony is that the diet they were eating before was the diet that we found that can reverse and prevent all these conditions. It's basically fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, soy products. These are things that generally are the least expensive things, except for the fact that our subsidies are so out of kilter.
Well, Yonatan Adiri, I don't think he said it on stage, but he told us, I think at dinner last night, that in Israel, they have no VAT on fruits and vegetables. So they've specifically made a national policy to have no tax on healthy foods.
But not only do we tax healthy foods, but we subsidize the unhealthy ones. We actually make it cheaper to eat the junk
Yeah,
food.
we go the opposite direction, even worse. Yeah. You want to say something?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I think we shouldn't pull our punches on this one. I mean, we do live in a system where the sort of agricultural food industrial complex is extremely powerful and is generating, you know, tremendous, costs at the very least, but real suffering. And you know, it's not that these people are poor; it's that they're the most subject to those traps.
Well, I agree with that, but I think that's a larger discussion about.
He's been talking about that for 30 years. This thing about Facebook is new.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to kick it into that discussion a little bit.
I agree. No argument from me.
We're running short on time, but if anybody has any...
And by the way, I think the Founding Fathers were geniuses in the idea of separation of powers, but they didn't anticipate corporate America having so much power with no checks and balances, and that's part of the problem.
I'll say. That's a good point. How about somebody who hasn't said anything all day but just wants to throw one last thought in or two last thoughts? Okay, please. Oh, thank you so much. Identify yourself. The mic's right behind you.
I'm Solange, and I work with the Community Health Center, and I work with a lot of immigrant patients. And just to really point out what you're saying is so true, I have a patient who said she wasn't leaving the house since January because she's afraid that if she leaves the house, she's going to get deported. She's diabetic. She gained 10 pounds. Her A1C went from 7.5 to 11. because she started eating her traditional food of tortillas. And she said, I have a lot of stress, and all I can do is eat. And so I think you got to the root of the problem. What do we do about the stress? It is the food industry, it is the lack of affordable, healthy foods, but really a lot of what motivates obesity and diabetes is stress-related eating. So
Well,
what
that's
would
true.
you say to
Whether
that?
it's food or, some of the other things we talked about, I agree with that. And that's why we come back to this idea of community and love and support, because I just find that when people feel loved and supported, no matter what stresses they're under, they're much more likely to make lifestyle choices that are life-enhancing than self-destructive. Liz Blackburn and Alyssa Epple did an amazing study. They looked at women who were chronic caregivers of parents with Alzheimer's or kids with autism. And they found the more stress they felt, and the longer they felt that way, the shorter their telomeres were. And when you compare the low stress and the high stress women, it shortened their lifespan by 9 to 17 years. That's a lot. But what I found even more important, more interesting and more important, was that it wasn't an objective measure of stress, the women's perception of it. You could have two women in very similar life situations. One was coping with it better. They were doing the things we've been talking about. They were exercising, they were meditating, they had social support, they had a sense of meaning in their lives. And that was really the key difference. It wasn't, even so you may not be able to change the situation you're in, but we have a lot of tools that we can use on how we can teach people to manage them. And I think having Facebook do communities that are really based on true intimacy and authenticity could be a real buffer to that and could be profoundly healing on a huge scale.
Well, that was really good. Thank you so much, Dean.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it, your being here with us, and hope to